So I want to introduce you to somebody that you're going to hear me, if you've listened over the last few years, you've heard me mention this couple before, but you're going to hear me talk about them for the next 4 weeks. This is Dr. John and Julie Gottman. So they are they're considered to be subject matter experts on the area of marriage and relationships. For over 40 years out in Seattle, they've been running a laboratory. And it's a couples laboratory. And they literally hook the couples up to all kinds of machines, and then they watch them interact. And they track their blood pressure, and they track their pupil dilation, and they track, every perspiration, everything you can track, how their brain is, it's just incredible the data they've collected in 40 years. Now, because of what they've done for 40 years, they notice trends, and here's how good they are. That's why I said they're some of the premier marriage and relationship experts in America. Did you know that they can predict if your relationship is going to make it with a 90% accuracy rate, documented 90% accuracy rate, after listening to you interact for only 10 minutes? They hook you up to their machines. Who knows what topics they give you to talk about, but I bet that's fun. They watch you for 10 minutes, and they have a documented 90% accuracy rate predicting whether or not you're going to make it as a couple. Isn't that incredible? So it's like, what are they listening for? What are they hearing in that 10 minutes that gives them so much information? They're like, you guys can stop. You're just not going to make it. We can't help you leave. So, right? It's like, what in the world do they hear? Well, and I like reading their stuff. I follow their blog. By the way, if you like Instagram, they have an Instagram account. If you like blogs or reading blogs, you can get a daily feed sent to you. My wife and I read this. It's so interesting. We learn so much from it. But one of the things they talked about is that there are elements, and all of you who have ever been married or in a relationship know, there are elements in any relationship that are corrosive to the relationship. And I love the word, right? So if you go out and look at my 2004 Pontiac Vibe afterwards, it's got some corrosion around the back and the wheel, it's being eaten away. And some things they noticed were more corrosive than others. As a matter of fact, they noticed that if they heard certain things in the dialogue in 10 minutes, they knew that those corrosive elements were toxic to the relationship. And over the years, they tracked and identified 4 major corrosive elements, and then they humorously named them the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. That's what they call them. I'm not making that up. That's what they call them, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So do you know the reference? It's a reference from the book of Revelation. So the last book of your Bible, book of Revelation, it's a prophetical book about the end times. And it's all this prophecy about what's going to take place, and it's really hard to interpret, but at one point, the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse show up, and the imagery is, once you know that those 4 horsemen show up, the end is near. And so they noticed, as they were watching these couples year after year, decade after decade, that if any of these 4 horsemen showed up in the relationship, in the conversation, the end was near. And so they started talking about these 4 things that have to go. They have to go. And the very first one that we're going to be talking about, which we're going to spend the next 4 weeks talking about, what are these 4 killers? If you allow them into any relationship, and a lot of this I'm going to apply to marriage, but the reality is any key relationship in your life, your parenting relationships, friendships, even work relationships, you allow it in, it's going to kill that relationship. So the very first one we're going to talk about is criticism. Number 1. It is the first one they talk about for a reason, because it's often an entryway into the other ones. Now, all of you know that we live in an incredibly critical world, right? Are any of you sitting here saying, boy, I wish our world was more critical? I just don't think we criticize enough, right? Is any of you thinking that? Probably not. Because we live in a critical world that no matter what you say and what you do, you will be criticized. If you don't believe me, sign up to coach any level of kids' sports in America today. Any level. I don't care what it is. Or better yet, sign up to ref any level of kids' sports in America today and find out if you get criticized, right? You literally can't tie your shoes today without getting criticized. Matter of fact, I read something last year. So this woman's name is Haley Baldwin. So apparently she's married to Justin Bieber. And both of them are outspoken about their faith, believe in Jesus, and they talk about their faith. And so she has an Instagram account, and this is how I heard, I didn't know anything about her, but I read this news article a year ago. She was posting on Instagram saying, hey, I'm looking for ideas for Halloween this year. Okay, No big deal, right? Oh my goodness. If you're a Christian and you publicly post that you're looking for costume ideas on how you're going to celebrate Halloween, in case you don't know this, there is a huge percentage of Christians who think that's wrong. You cannot celebrate Halloween ever, and they will come at you, and they came after her. In one of the comments, somebody called her a fake Christian. You're just a fake Christian. You're not even a real Christian. Let me just clear this up for you. If any of you have any questions, 2 things to remember. Number 1, Satan owns no days in the calendar. God owns them all. Okay? He owns every single one. There is no day he owns. Second, any day where people willingly pour gobs and gobs of chocolate into your hands for free is a gift, clear sign that it is divine and from God. Okay? Problem solved. But no matter what you do, right? No matter what you do in America, you are going to be criticized. Guaranteed. Guaranteed. Whatever you say, whatever you do. And many of you know this. I mean, if I were to ask you to think about a time in your life when you had to interact with someone who was highly critical, probably not hard to come up with some faces, right? Some of you are raised at home with a mom or dad who is really critical. And they criticize all the time, right? Some of you have been in a romantic relationship with somebody who criticized all the time, and it just exhausted you. Some of you have worked for a boss who was highly critical. You ever had that? Everything you did was wrong. Everything you said was wrong. Every report you submitted was wrong. And how did it make you feel? It's exhausting, right? It has a terrible impact on the person receiving the criticism. So one of the things they were noticing, and another counselor was talking about it, said habitual criticism, there's that word, can corrode the very foundation of a relationship. Now it gets a little confusing then. Some people are like, okay, if I can't criticize my spouse or my kids or my partner or my parents, my coworkers, does that mean I just have to be quiet and just take everything? Even when there are things that are bad or destructive, I just have to keep my mouth closed? Well, of course not. That's not what it means at all. There's a way to do it, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. So we're starting this series today called Relationship Restart, and we're going to talk about this. How do you talk about an issue without criticizing the person? This is super important to learn. When I ask you to grab your program, inside you'll find these notes, and if you want to follow along, grab a pen. There'll be some really important things to write down on your notes today. Of course, welcome to those of you who are watching online. So glad you've tuned in today. Love to hear the comments, and if you want to follow along with these notes, just go to our website, penuelchurchlife.com, and you can download them for free. So let's jump into this. The very first thing, we're only going to talk about 2 things, is first you have to understand what is criticism, because it may not be what you think it is. So we want to start with a really clear definition of what this is. Now, if you read the Gottman material, if you sign up for that blog or the Instagram, you're going to start hearing them use these words. And they use 2 different words. They use the words complaint, which they say is okay, and criticism, which they say is bad. This is the corrosive one. Complaining about an issue, they say, is fine. Now, it was confusing when I first started reading this until you understand their definitions. A complaint, according to them, is focusing on a specific behavior or issue. Okay? A specific behavior or issue. That's what they define a complaint as. Whereas criticism is focusing on the character or personality of the other person. So when you criticize, according to them, and this is what they were listening for, it's a way of complaining that suggests that your partner's personality is defective. The problem isn't the issue. The problem is them. They are the problem. And that's criticism. So I struggled when I was first learning this model. It's like, I don't really like the word complaint, right? The Bible talks about not complaining, so I didn't like, what they're saying is it's okay to complain, it's not okay to criticize. And I didn't really like that definition until you understand that the reality of what they define the word complain is simply, let's talk about an issue. And it's appropriate. All of you know it's appropriate. Let's say that after church today, you're all hungry, you're like, I haven't had enough ice cream and everything else, let's go out to eat. So let's go out, and when you go out to eat, and you sit down and you're like, oh, they got soup. That sounds good. So you order a big bowl of soup and you put your spoon in and you pull your spoon up and you're about to take your first bite and you see that. Okay? Now, how many of you think it would be wrong to complain about a fly in your soup, right? None of you. None of you are going to be like, well, I'm a Christian. I got to just eat it, right? You're not going to do that. Can't complain. You're going to say, waiter, waitress, there's a fly in my soup. And I'll take something else now, not the soup, right? You're not going to order it again, and you're not going to just eat it. That's what they mean by it's legit to say, hey, we got a fly in the soup. And many of you in your marriages, you got flies in your soup. You got issues that are going on right now that it is totally appropriate to talk about those issues. Completely appropriate. And parents, you've got issues with your kids, and, we have issues at work. It's totally appropriate to say, can we talk about the issue? As long as we don't cross into criticism. So let me show you what this sounds like. A complaint would be this. Hey, you said you'd empty the dishwasher and it's not done. I know that's hypothetical. Right? Never happens, right? So just imagine, right? Criticism would go beyond that, and then it would sound like this, right? You always make me do all the chores. You never do what you say. Do you hear the difference? Now it's not about the dishwasher being unemptied. The problem is you. You make promises and you don't follow through. You make me do all the chores around here. You hear the attack is on the person in the second one. Criticism is attacking the person. It's tearing down the value of the person. Let me give you another example. A complaint. I was scared when you were running late and didn't call. I thought we had agreed that we would do that for each other. So at some point in the relationship, the couple said, I don't like it when I don't know where you are. Can we come up with a new guideline? Yeah, okay. If you're running late, we're going to call each other or text each other. And then one of them forgets. And so they bring it up because they're nervous, right? They feel uncomfortable. They don't know what's going on. So it's a legit complaint. In their relationship, that's really important to them. Criticism would be this. You never think about how your behavior affects me. You're so selfish, you never think about me. Do you hear the difference? I've gone from talking about the fly in the soup to talking about how incompetent and awful a human being you are for bringing me soup with a fly in it. So I've moved beyond the issue to attack the person, and that's criticism, and that's what they're listening for. It's horsemen of the apocalypse number one. When they hear in a relationship that somebody is criticizing their partner, they know this is in big trouble. And again, let me just say really clearly, all of you, when we go through this series and these four horsemen, you're going to hear different things that are going to make you go, oh, ow, oh, I maybe have done that, okay? It doesn't mean your relationship is doomed. It means you need to be aware and solve the problem. So we're going to talk a lot about solution in this whole thing. The other thing that was fascinating to me as I was prepping this message is I've been reading through in my own personal devotional time the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, just reading the life of Jesus. And I was struck, and I'm learning about these four horsemen and reading the life of Jesus, how you can see these horsemen so present in the life of Jesus with horrible effect. So if you know anything about Jesus, one of the things that he had a real issue with was the religious leaders of his day. They were called the Pharisees. One of the groups was called the Pharisees. For them, their religion was about being in front of everybody, getting all the accolades, getting the most important seats, getting, everybody knowing how spiritual they were and amazing they were. And Jesus was like, that has nothing to do with following my Father. Nothing. And he would address things that they were doing. Well, they didn't like that. And so these people were used to everybody bowing in front of them, and all of a sudden Jesus comes along and says, that's not what it means to follow my Father. You should do your things in secret. You should take the lowest place, not the top place. And they were really mad at him. So they began to criticize him. Remember the difference? They weren't talking about the fly in the soup. They went after his personage. So one time, in Matthew, there's this person who's brought to Jesus who is blind and mute. Jesus recognizes that there's a spiritual position that's impacting this person's freedom. So he casts out that demon. We're not here to talk about that subject today, but he sets the man free. And immediately the man's eyes are open, he can see, his mouth is loosened, he can talk, and it's an incredible miracle. This man's life just got a lot better, right? Tremendous positive. And the report gets back to those Pharisees. Look what they say. When the Pharisees heard about the miracle, they said, no wonder he can cast out demons. He gets his power from Satan. the prince of demons. In a religious society like theirs 2,000 years ago, there could be no more personal attack than to look at the power of God displayed through Jesus and say, that's not the power of God, that's the power of the devil. Do you hear the difference? They aren't talking about the issue. They're talking about the person. And it's so interesting. You're going to see this as we go through this series, how Jesus endured all of these different attacks personally and the separation and damage that happened in the relationship. If I were to ask you just to think about what happens in the life of a person who receives so much criticism. Some of you don't have to think about it. You know what it's like. You've been criticized harshly by others, right? You know that that person feels attacked, blamed, rejected. They really get hurt. This is a big one. It is absolutely toxic to a person's self-esteem, because when the message you're receiving all the time is, it's not that I do wrong, it's that I am wrong. I am wrong. There's something wrong about me. It is so damaging to their image and view of who they are. So toxic. Destroys any kind of intimacy in that relationship, and it opens the door for all the other horsemen, which we're going to get into. One psychologist put it this way. They said, this is damaging to a relationship because instead of inviting a conversation of emotional connectedness, you invite a conversation of emotional and verbal attacks. That's just not good. So here's what I want you to think about. Is this happening in any of your relationships today? First, think about it on the receiving end. Are you the recipient of criticism? Someone criticizing you? For all of you who are married, I do want you to think about something. I want you to think about putting down an estimate on a scale of 1 to 10 on how big an issue this is in your relationship. But if you do this, here's what I challenge you to do. Write it down. Write down your number and don't show your spouse. And then ask them to guess what number you put down. I think that could lead to some really interesting conversations. So it might be a challenging topic, right? Some of you don't need to put the number down. You already know this is an issue. You feel criticized. You feel like the attacks are personal. So what's the solve for this? Well, you have to learn to use a gentle startup, and that's right from Gottman's language, but boy, is that right from the Bible. Gentleness is so commonly referred to in the New Testament as one of the fruits of the Spirit, a quality that's supposed to be present and visible inside of us. So let me give you an example. I want you to think about this situation. Again, some of you, and think, have you ever had a fight like this? So there's a couple, they both worked full-time jobs, they were super busy, they had young kids, and they were also, at this time of the year, they were finishing up an outdoor patio project. And it was a lot of work for them. They had bit off a lot, maybe a little bit more than they could chew. And, it's this time of year. We know what comes after, this time of year. Pretty soon, we got to get this done or else snow is going to fly. We're not going to be able to get it done. And so they were working all week and working on the patio project on the weekend, and they were talking about, we got to get this done, we got to get this done. And so one Saturday morning, the wife woke up early. She made a cup of coffee and went outside and started working on the patio project. She's working for a while. And then she goes in to refill her coffee cup, and she walks in and sees her husband is up. But he didn't come out to help. He's just sitting on the couch, feet up on the table with a cup of coffee, watching SportsCenter. Okay? So she marches over to him. She says, you know what? I am so sick of this. You don't do anything around here. I'm just your workhorse. You never help me with anything. You don't care about me. All I am to you is someone to get something done. You don't help with the dishes. You don't help with the laundry. You don't help with the kids. You don't help with the homework. I am not putting up with it anymore. And out she storms. And the guy's sitting there going, what just happened, right? You ever have a fight like that? Ever have a fight where you're like, what just happened? It's like, that was so much emotion. Like, what's going on here? So, and because they're common, by the way, did you hear all the criticism in the story? You don't do anything around here. That's criticism. That's you. By the way, anytime you start pointing the finger with the you, even if you don't point the finger and you just verbally point the finger with the word you, you're into criticism. You never help me. Anytime you use the word never and always, you're almost always crossing into criticism, right? You don't care about me. Oh, really? So she has crawled into the heart of her own husband and from within can feel what he feels toward her, right? Right? How possible is that? Of course not, but it's what we do. It's what we do. I know what you're feeling. I know what you're... No, we don't. So how do we handle this instead? So on your notes, there's 3 steps I'm going to give you, but before you even get to those steps, there's a couple of preparation things. I want to just call these out. First, you need to pick the right time to have this conversation. Pick the right time to have this conversation. Don't just run into it. And we run into it all the time. I love this verse. One of my favorite verses from Proverbs is this one. A loud and cheerful greeting early in the morning will be taken as a curse. Isn't that true? Some of you are morning people. You just bounce out of bed and it's like, woohoo! And some of you are not married to that. So, right, that's not who they are. So a loud greeting early in the morning will be taken as a curse, right? And the point of it is timing, people. Timing. Time it better. It's not just about what you want, it's about what they need. So it's about timing. I love that. And so in that story I just told, it's a very common scenario, right? That happens in relationships all the time. All of a sudden you're in the middle of a big fight and you didn't even see it coming. You have no idea why it came. It's like, what's going on? And so many times what happens is there's a fly in the soup. And you just, dump it out and move on. You're like, well, okay. And then the next day, there's another fly in the soup. And you're like, well, I'll ignore that one too. And slowly, these flies in the soup accumulate, and they build up and build up and build up. And then all of a sudden, you get triggered and you blow up, right? The buildup turns into a blow up. And there are a lot of reasons why we don't. You're afraid of how they're going to respond. You may not know how to say it. Maybe they're touchy about this subject. Who knows? There's all kinds of reasons why we do it, but we do it. We do it all the time. And then, of course, do we do it well when we're triggered and blow up? Are we careful about what we say in those blow-up moments? Oh, no. Not at all. It's really when we do a lot of destruction in the relationship. So we've got to make sure we pick the right time, and the right time includes getting yourself calm first so you can think. And we'll show you what you should be thinking about in a moment. But make sure you pick the right time. And then second, only one issue at a time. One. And in the story, the woman did not do one, right? She went after everything. She brought up the dishes, the laundry, the kids, the housework. I mean, she had a laundry list. That's what we call the kitchen sink conversation. She's chucking everything at him, including the kitchen sink, right? So what's the right way to do it? So I'm going to hit pause. I feel myself triggered. I'm going to hit pause. I'm going to do one issue at a time. What am I going to be saying? So here's the formula. It's on your notes. I feel because I need. I feel because I need. So normally when you see fill in the blanks on my notes, I have you fill something in. Oh no, not today. You're going to have to fill them in. I can't fill those in for you. When you've got an issue, there's a fly in the soup. You're going to say, here's how I feel because of this, and here's what I need. So let's break these 3 steps down. So first, by the way, notice there's no word you, right? It's not the word you, it's I, not you. So I'm just going to talk about me. So here we go. So 3 things. Step 1, that first one, talk about your feelings. Oh, everybody's favorite subject. Let's just all sit around and talk about our feelings. Ugh. Super hard. This is a really hard one. Talk about your feelings. So the first thing is I feel. So here's the question you got to answer. It's on your notes. Look at this. What was I feeling underneath my response of anger or irritation or frustration? What was I feeling? And I found this quote, and I threw it in because I thought it was great from the Gottmans. Look at this. Behind every complaint is a deep personal longing. Did you know that? Did you ever stop and think about that? If your spouse or significant other is bringing something up because they care about something, there's something they need from you. So listening in those moments is really important. But why are you getting upset? What's triggering this inside of you? So think about that woman. The wife comes in, sees the husband on the couch, blows. What was she feeling? I took a shot at it. I don't know, right? But chances are she might have been feeling a little taken for granted, don't you think? It's like, I'm working and you're sitting. Or maybe she felt a little disappointed because she expected that they would be doing this together, and she was disappointed that they weren't. She thought he was just sleeping in, and that was okay, but not just sitting around watching TV while she's working. It's a different thing. Do you think she felt hurt or maybe unsupported? So you identify what it is. Now I'll be really honest with you, this is all new to me. This one was totally new to me. I never would have thought to put this in a sermon, but as I was reading and prepping, I was like, oh my goodness, this is so much more significant. And I'm a guy, so this is really hard. I feel hungry, and I feel that, so, right? So it's like, okay, super hard. Super hard. But here's what I read, and it made so much sense to me. One author said, the softer emotions are more difficult to share because they're vulnerable. But they're also much more likely to be heard and received well by our partners than our hard, angry emotions. Have you learned that that's true? That just blew me away when I read that quote. Because when someone comes out with anger, you're going to trigger one of the other horsemen we're going to get to, called defensiveness. But when someone comes to me and says, you know what, I feel a little bit unsupported. Well, that's a softer thing to say to me. And you have way more shot of me engaging with that. Do you hear that? Do you understand the difference? It's so important to get below the anger. All of you know anger is a surface emotion. It's not your primary. It's a secondary emotion. Underneath the anger is something. You got to get to that something. What are you really feeling? Because that's going to give you the best shot of being heard. So think about it. So I feel, and what I feel, and by the way, if you want to understand how, just read Proverbs and look at all the verses where it warns about anger and its toxic effect in our relationships. People with understanding control their anger. A hot-tempered person shows great foolishness. So that's why you got to calm yourself down, pick the right time, and think through these steps. Do not go off angry, because anger seldom communicates what you want it to communicate. And again, I'll just tell you, for me, this is super hard. Still learning this one. Really challenging. Okay, so remember the formula. I feel, and then number 2, because. And the because is this. Step 2, talk about the behavior. What is the observable behavior? I feel what? Well, I feel disappointed or sad or upset or hurt. And why? Well, because you can think about that. And this is where, again, one of the things we do that's so bad is we assume we know their motives. And we assume they know what their intention was. And we don't. In the story I just told you, the woman jumped to a conclusion where she said, you're only sitting here because you don't care about me. That's an assumption about her husband's motives. And it's attacking the person, not the problem. Because there was a fly in her soup, right? It's a legitimate fly. She's working hard, and he's sitting on the couch watching SportsCenter. That's a legitimate fly in the soup. But what we do so often is we attack the person, not the problem. We make assumptions. So here's what she could have said. I feel upset when I came in and saw you relaxing because I expected we would be working together today, so I didn't understand why you were inside. Do you hear how much better a fly conversation that is? Remember the formula? I feel, right? First thing, I feel upset. I feel disappointed. I feel hurt. I feel whatever it is. What's the emotion underneath the anger? And remember the second part. I feel because I thought this was something we'd agreed upon that we were going to do today. I don't understand. So it hurt me. Okay? Now, the third thing, remember the formula. I feel because I need. This is also vulnerable, but it's step 3. Tell them what you need. What do you need? What do you need from them? What do you need? And this is so critical. If you read in the New Testament, it's an interesting dynamic. In America, we so value marriage. Well, it's like you're not complete if you're single. When you read the Bible, you don't get that same message at all. Actually, quite the opposite. In the New Testament, Paul regularly writes about the value of singleness. And he holds it up as an incredibly high value. At one point he says, I wish you could all be single just like me. Because he said, then all you have to think about each day is, how can I please the Lord? But then he says this. He said, but if you get married, a married man has to think about his earthly responsibilities and how to please his wife. So the moment you put the rings on, he says, now you have divided loyalties. It is, how can I please God and how can I please my wife? And then, just so you know, 2 verses later, he doesn't leave women out of it. He turns it around and says, and by the way, married women, you have to think about how you can please your husband. And your interests are divided. So, let me ask you this. Was the husband sitting on the couch watching SportsCenter while his wife out working, thinking about how to please his wife or how to please himself? All of you know the answer. Not a trick question, right? One of the worst things that can happen, one of the things that will destroy any relationship faster than any other, is every time you get a win and your spouse gets a loss, the relationship loses. He was winning, she was losing. Right? It's always about win-win. That's what Paul is saying in this. It's got to be, I take my wife's interest into mind at the same time I think of mine. I take my husband's interest in mind at the same time I think about mine. It's always about win-win solutions. It's not about I win, they lose, because then the relationship loses. That's what he's saying. So, how could she have done it? Well, look at this quote. I like this. It says, if we could wave a magic wand and get what you need, what would things be like? So some of you have a hard time articulating what you need. So if you could snap your fingers and they would do what you want, what do you need? And then the second part of that is so critical. Tell them. Tell them. I know that sounds like a duh, and yet the reality is so many times over the years, you know what I hear spouses say? I just wanted them to figure it out on their own. I just wanted them to know it. I just wanted them to enter into my heart, and it's like, oh, for goodness sakes. They are not you. They'll never be you. They won't ever have the same needs you do. So you just have to tell them. It's their job to respond to your needs. It's your job to tell them what you need. I've never met an authentic mind reader, ever. So don't treat your spouse like one. Be really, really honest with them. Tell them what you need. Here's what I need from you. Okay, so one of the funny things that I loved, and I'll finish up with this, in the literature they talk about the difference between what they call relationships that aren't going to make it, they call them disasters, and the ones that are really solid, they call them masters. So you tell me which way your relationship needle points. Is it more towards the disaster side, more towards the master side? Here's some examples of it. Disaster, they said, you talked about yourself all through dinner, you never asked about my day. What's wrong with you? Okay? What's wrong with you isn't a question, by the way. Just in case you were wondering, it's an attack on the person. Never, ever say that to someone. Well, I was just asking them a question. No, you weren't. You were attacking the person. That's criticism. Do you hear it? We've gone beyond the first 2 sentences are the fly in the soup, and the last one is the criticism. And once you've gotten to that point, you're trashing the relationship because you're damaging the person. The master would say it this way. Hey, you talked about yourself all through dinner and never asked about my day. I hurt my feelings. I need you to ask me about my day. Now notice, the formula is a little out of order, right? This time is the because, here's what happened, then went the feelings, and then what they needed. The point is to have the same 3 things, especially when you're learning it. I feel because I need. I feel because I need. All 3 elements are here. Disaster. You always leave your dirty dishes in the sink. You are so inconsiderate. Okay? So we've crossed again out of the fly in the soup into the criticism. Masters do it this way. Hey, I'm feeling overwhelmed by all the dishes piling up. Can you help me out by cleaning them up before I start dinner? So here's how I feel. I feel overwhelmed. You ever felt overwhelmed about what you got to get done around the house? About what's going on in your life? Here's how I feel. I feel overwhelmed. And here's the reason why. Because the kitchen's a mess and I'm about to start dinner. So here's what I need. Can you take care of the dishes for me? I'll take care of dinner. Does that make sense? I love this one final quote. I'll leave you with this. Think of how you would make a behavior request to someone you admire and respect. That's how you should make behavior requests of your partner. You think about the person you love and admire and respect the most, and how you would talk to them. That's how you should be talking to your partner. So a couple of things as we finish up today. Is criticism present in your relationship? Not complaining. Not complaining, because you should say, waiter, there's a fly in my soup. It's totally fine to say, there's an issue. Can we talk about this? Totally fine. But what you watch for is criticism, where that has become a personal attack. So is that present? If you want to, think about this on a scale of 1 to 10, how much of criticism is an issue in your relationship today? If you were putting it down, 10 being horrible, 1 being I hardly ever see it at all, it'd be a great discussion to have with your spouse or significant other. Do you ever stop talking about the fly in the soup and attack the person yourself? It's easy for us to think about how they do it to us, and I don't want that to be your only thought today. I want you to think about, do you ever do this? And maybe you don't do it with your spouse, but you sure do it with your kids. Or you sure do it with a friend, or you sure do it with a coworker. You think they're stupid, and you don't mind telling people about that. That's personal. You've crossed the line maybe in another relationship, so watch for that. As followers of Jesus, we don't get to do that and love them. That's not love. And what can you do today to remember that formula? Remember the formula? I feel because I need. Let me have you bow your heads. Now, maybe for some of you here today, this whole idea, Jesus knows, one of the things I love about Jesus is he knows exactly what it's like to live through this world like we have. Only the Bible says that because he was the Son of God, he lived this world without giving in to temptation to retaliate or to avenge himself. I mean, he knew. Listen, Jesus knows exactly what it's like to be intensely and unfairly criticized just for doing good. He knows exactly what it's like, and yet still in this world, living through all of this, he never made the decision to act in unloving ways, even towards people who hated him. From the cross, he literally said, Father, forgive them, they don't even know what they're doing. His love was complete. Ours is not. All of us can think of times where we have stepped across the line into behavior that we know we shouldn't have. And the Bible says it's a big deal to God, because there is no imperfection in him. So this loving God sent Jesus on purpose, his only son, into the world to pay the price that we should pay for what we've done that's wrong. Jesus died on a cross and rose again to pay for us, to forgive us, and to give us his gift of eternal life. If you want your debt paid today by Jesus, he loves you. Oh my goodness, he's just waiting for you to turn to him. There has never been a moment of your life where his eye has not been upon you. There's never been a moment of your life, no matter what you've done, where he hasn't wanted you. And he wants you in his family right now if you'll let him. You just have to say something like this to him in your heart. Say, Jesus, I'm turning to you. I know that I've done things that I shouldn't have done in my life. Please forgive me. I want you in my life today. In Jesus' name, amen. As we finish up today, can I ask you all to grab your little connection card out of your program, even if you're a regular attender, just take a moment and do this. Maybe today you ask Jesus to forgive you. Here's a box right here. Just check that box. Let us know what you've done. We'll send you some follow-up material in the mail. If you have something you want us to pray about, maybe this is a big subject for you and want us to pray, put it down here. Just let us know. We have a team of people that will pray for you today. Other than that, I think, and then just drop this in one of the 2 offering boxes back on the back wall where you came in. And hope to see you again next week.